We offer 4 main ways to control your thermostat system. You've either got a simple onboard TRV valve which works just like a radiator. You can have a hardwired thermostat back to a remote 2-port valve, or you can have a wireless thermostat back to a remote 2-port valve, or you can have a full all singing all dancing manifold system. When it comes to the digital controller itself, you're actually spoiled for choice. Whether it's Google Nest, Hive, Tado, Heatmiser, Honeywell's Evo Home, Myson, Drayton, Salus, there's literally an endless list. Never mind all the boiler manufacturers' controls as well. Now, the controller nerds will kill me for saying this, but they all basically do the same thing. They tell something that the room is either too hot or too cold, and most of them nowadays will link back to your phone regardless. The first thing to differentiate is boiler and heat pump controls or individual room thermostats, which operate each room as its own standalone heating zone. If it's just a boiler or heat pump control, then it's really easy. The thermostat tells the boiler when it needs heat, the boiler fires up and sends hot water around your central heating system. In that respect, the thermostat is no different to a radiator. You've got a little onboard TRV valve, you use the control knob to adjust the overall comfort setting, and whenever that thermostat tells the boiler that it's too cold, the whole house comes on and the thermostats on board do their job. And in that respect, it's no different to a radiator. You can have whatever thermostat you like. It matters not to me. It's when you get into controlling individual rooms digitally that things get interesting. Now, it's worth saying that if you are on an air source heat pump, you should not be overzoning your house, i.e. don't create lots of tiny little heating zones, because that can lead to the heat pump short cycling, which is ultimately going to result in really poor energy performance. There's 2 main options with wall mounted thermostats. You've got hardwired and you've got wireless. Hardwired is the more reliable of the 2. It's called hardwired because it has a permanent power supply to the thermostat, and that power supply is then switched out of the stat into a valve or back to a boiler. If you've got the opportunity to do a hardwired thermostat, I'd definitely recommend it. There's more first fix wiring involved, but in the long run, there's a lot less effort and a lot more reliability in that respect. The wireless thermostats are ideal for retrofit because the actual bit that monitors the temperature is separate to the bit that switches the controls. So, for example, if you have this remote valve located on a pipe drop, you could stash this in a cupboard or under a floorboard or anything like that where you've got space. The advantage is that you can also stick the receiver right next to it and the thermostat is remote. Now, the problem with these is that more often than not, people end up walking around the house with them, putting them in the pocket, and I'd say don't do that. Put it in the coldest point of the house and leave it there. The other disadvantage of using wireless thermostats is that if you have a multiple zone system, over time the batteries start to die at different times, so you find yourself constantly replacing the batteries. You also have to check that all of the thermostat settings are correct, and if one of them starts to go wrong, another one starts to go wrong, and you get connectivity issues, it's not always immediately obvious. If you're controlling thermostat from a wall-mounted thermostat, you're either wiring the thermostat back to a remote valve, or you're wiring it back to a wiring centre, which is located next to a manifold. And if you are on a manifold, I've got a much better video than this that explains all about them. The control valve that we supply is actually very compact. It's only about 75mm long, it's about 40mm deep, and it's about 120mm tall. But you do need to give some thought as to where you're going to hide this. Obviously, if your pipework is coming from the other side of a wall, in a cupboard, or it's coming from underneath a timber suspended floor, hiding little remote valves like this is pretty straightforward. If you've not got the option of hiding a remote valve and you want to control the thermostat, you really do need to give some thought as to how important digital controls are to you. The thermostat will operate quite happily on a TRV valve, and you might be trying to achieve something in there that's really not that necessary. If you are installing thermostat in the biggest and hardest to heat room in the house, you don't actually need an onboard TRV or a room thermostat, because you should really have your boiler thermostat located in that hard to heat room. The thermostat in that room will then just run off the central heating as and when the boiler fires up. If you are having the boiler controlled separately to your thermostat system, you need to think about how that's wired up. So for example, this is the valve that operates your thermostat system, okay? The thermostat is wired to the valve. When the thermostat calls for heat, the valve will open, but there's nothing to tell your boiler to deliver the heat to the valve. You'll need to run a secondary cable from that thermostat to the boiler as well if you haven't got a secondary boiler supply. If your thermostat is just operating the valve, then your boiler needs to be calling for heat in order for that heating zone to be activated. To keep things simple, the thermostat system will work with any form of central heating controller. As long as it's a wall-mounted thermostat or you're using a simple onboard thermostat TRV with a boiler controller, it really doesn't matter to us which route you take. Often with heating controls, you do get what you pay for, and in general, the more expensive controls do offer certain features and benefits that the cheaper controls won't, particularly when it comes to reliability. If you're unsure about what the right control strategy is for you, then you can speak to one of our advisors in the office. We have absolutely no affiliation to any manufacturer of heating controls, which means that you can be sure you're going to get completely impartial advice, and we can assist you in reaching a point that you're happy with. There's a link in the description below. If you are currently working on a project with us, click the link, book a call, and take our advice.